If your teeth are rotting out of your head, probably not eating the right thing. People on a carnivore diet and ketogenic diets, they improve massively. Limitless Lindy that's lost 500 pounds.
Dr. Anthony Chaffee is a world-renowned expert on the carnivore diet and has helped millions of people reverse chronic disease.
He will help you get faster results, and it starts with eating more fat.
That our pets, zoo animals, and any other animal that starts being fed the same crap that we're eating gets the same diseases we're getting. You see bears going through garbage cans. Is garbage the optimal diet for bears? No, it's opportunistic. I saw diseases that I was taught are incurable. They're chronic conditions. They only get worse. Go away. Plants are harmful. They do cause harm. Spinach isn't all that innocuous, and you eat too much of it, you can actually get oxalate poisoning. We're talking about optimal here and optimizing our health, and to do that, you need to look at what humans have been prospering on for the longest, and that's meat. A real carnivore diet, and the best version of a carnivore diet, is strictly high-fat meat and water, and that's it. It's not enough to just eat meat, because meat's not this magic elixir that will just heal you. So I tell my patients who are trying to lose weight to eat more, but eat the right things. You will often need to add 5 to 7 grams of salt.
What do you think people do wrong? The number one thing they do wrong on a carnivore diet when they first start?
When I see people not having the results that they want, it's almost always that they're not.
This episode features Dr. Anthony Chaffee, and he'll discuss the ultimate carnivore beginner guide and how you can get faster carnivore results. Now, during this conversation, if you have a question for Dr. Chaffee or you still feel you need help, you can meet Dr. Chaffee live on our Go Carnivore community. You can ask him any of your questions as well as our other carnivore doctors. Just head to gocarnivore.com. Now, if you're learning from and enjoying these free episodes, please hit the subscribe button, because we know that food is medicine. And by the simple act of subscribing, you can help share the message to millions more people that need to hear the truth. And now for the episode with Dr. Anthony Chaffee. Dr. Chaffee, welcome.
Yeah, thank you so much. Good to see you.
When it comes to the carnivore diet, you are arguably one of the top experts that people look up to, and you've traveled the world educating people about the carnivore diet and how to achieve optimal health. But as with social media, there is so much controversy around the carnivore diet, and this has left people very confused. So today, Dr. Chaffee is going to share his decades of research and experience. We're going to talk about why the carnivore diet is optimal for human health. We're going to talk about Dr. Chaffee's protocol for you to get faster carnivore results, and the number one thing that people do wrong when they start carnivore. So Dr. Chaffee, my first question. There is a lot of controversy around what is the best diet for human health. Why do you think carnivore is the best diet for human health?
Well, I think just basically it aligns with our biology. It's our biologically evolved or designed diet, however you want to look at it. But either way, we're biologically adapted to eat meat, fatty meat. And not only are we adapted to eat it and gain nutrients from it, we are specifically and explicitly not biologically adept at getting those same nutrients from plants. In fact, many of these required nutrients don't exist in plants. And then you look at other nutrients that are in plants, we don't have the engineering and enzymes to break down these chemical bonds to release those nutrients, such as like niacin in corn. There's a ton of niacin in corn, but we can't access it unless we put it through chemical processes called nixtamalization that will break down these bonds, and then we can absorb that, or or fermenting them, or cooking them and preparing them in these different ways. You don't need to do that. You can eat meat raw. We choose to cook things out of preference. Humans have been cooking meat for 1.6 million years at least, but we don't have to. You don't have to do that in order to get the nutrients that we require from meat. So you get everything you need from meat in the proportion that you need it. You get no deleterious or harmful substances in the bargain. Plants, you don't get complete nutrition. You can't access even the nutrients that are available in plants because we don't have the enzymes to break them down, because we're not designed to eat them. And they do contain harmful chemicals. That's how plants defend themselves. They make a million different, at least a million that we know of, different defensive chemicals to stop animals and insects from eating them. So you don't get enough nutrients. You can't even access the nutrients that are there, and they come with deleterious and harmful chemicals as a result. So take home there is just eat meat and you'll be fine.
I want to ask, because I think people, when they're researching the carnivore diet and if they're just starting, they're going to hear that you need to eat vegetables and you need to eat fruit because it's quite healthy. So, can you explain for people that are just starting the carnivore diet, just learning about it, what is it in plants, first of all, that is bad for your health in the long term, why we don't need vegetables and fruit to live?
Yeah. Well, we don't need fruits and vegetables to live because, quite simply, we get everything we need from meat. How do we know this? Because we can see people who do this generationally. We have entire civilizations of human beings alive right now who traditionally eat a purely carnivorous diet. People make argument. You look back at the literature from the early 1800s or much before that as well. You see different pioneers and explorers from Western countries charting and the different new lands in America, Australia, etc., and their interactions with the natives of that land. And they were very clear. These people were carnivores. They ate meat, fatty meat, as much as possible. They knew which plants they could eat in a pinch, but it was starvation food. It was, if you couldn't get meat, this is what you would eat as a result, or they use them medicinally. It was not the primary food source for the majority of these populations. But people quibble and say, well, Native Americans ate X, Y, and Z, and this, and the okay. So in this isolated area, they would eat some crops, and you're trying to extrapolate that to 2 continents full of people. That doesn't actually really scan. And so, but all that aside, what about the Inuit and the Eskimo, formerly called the Eskimo people that would live in northern Canada, Greenland, northern Alaska, these sorts of places? There were no plants to eat. These people could be living in the Arctic Circle, where there is no plant life at all. There's nothing growing. There's only animals, largely sea life, but then also ones that sort of transition that barrier, like seals who go into the water and prey on the fish and other sorts of marine life. They come up on land and then bears get them, those sorts of things. And then the Inuit that prey on them and all of the above. So we know that humans not only can survive, but thrive on a meat-only diet. We know that humans have been alive and thriving in the Arctic Circle in the ice ages. And what are you supposed to eat in the ice ages if not meat? And so we know we get everything we need in the proportion that we need it, because you can't possibly survive unless you do get complete nutrition, and especially in those environments. Those are extremely harsh environments. And if you don't thrive, you die. That's all there is to it. No one's barely squeaking through an ice age in the Arctic Circle. So we not only thrived, we became the most dominant animal dominant species that's ever walked this earth. And it was during the ice ages that we came to that sort of world dominance and prominence. As to vegetables, well, you don't need to eat them. B, you don't want to eat them because they defend themselves chemically. A polar bear can mess you up. And so, people had to be able to fight and risk dying in order to fight these things off, defend themselves, or even kill them and bring that back to their tribe. But once they're dead, or an animal's dead, the meat itself is extremely healthy, barring smaller animals that can use poison sacs and stingers and things like that. But even in them, the meat itself is typically very healthy. And that's because they have other defenses. They have other kinetic defenses. They can move, they can fight back, they can fight you, they can try to hunt you and eat you. But plants can't. They're stationary. They can't move, they can't run away, they can't defend themselves in that kinetic fashion. So they have to use chemical warfare to stop animals and insects from eating them. And so, again, they make about 1 million different defensive chemicals to kill, injure, and disrupt the health of the organisms trying to eat them. And that goes all the way down to fungus and bacteria and things like that that try to take advantage of the plant as well. So they have extremely robust defenses. We know this intuitively because most plants on Earth will just kill you if you try to eat them. People saying like, well, if plants are trying to kill you, they're doing a really bad job. It's like, okay, tell that to hemlock, right? So, go ahead and make a garden salad out of random leaves you find in the forest, and tell me how good you feel the next day if you're still alive, right? That'd be a terrible idea. Most people know that if you get lost in the woods, you can't eat any random plant because most of them will make you very sick. So it's a really bad idea to do that. And then we just pretend that these plants that we get in the grocery store are not only safe but beneficial. Well, there's no evidence that we've ever eaten these things in large quantities while our species was evolving. People will trot out that some Neanderthals were found to have some grains in the calculi of their teeth. Well, that can mean anything. They could just have some stuff stuck in their teeth. It doesn't mean that they were eating a whole bunch of grains. Second of all, that's only in the very recent fossils of Neanderthals and very, very early Neanderthals and Homo sapiens and Homo erectus and Homo habilis. You did not see that. And either way, just because what someone chooses to eat out of necessity doesn't mean that that's what is optimal for them, right? You see bears going through garbage cans. Is garbage the optimal diet for bears? Like, no, it's opportunistically eating that because it's just trying to get enough for the winter. So we're talking about optimal here and optimizing our health, and to do that, you need to look at what humans have been prospering on for the longest, and that's meat. It's not something that we have to guard against because it's not inherently dangerous. It has all these nutrients that we need, and plants are harmful. They do cause harm to varying degrees. Lettuce is somewhat innocuous, but what? Spinach isn't all that innocuous, and you eat too much of it, you can actually get oxalate poisoning. Liam Hemsworth, the actor, actually put himself in the hospital with acute oxalate poisoning because he was talked into going vegan by some nutritionist that probably overcharged him. And he ends up, drinking spinach smoothies every morning for 3 weeks, and lands himself in the hospital with acute oxalate poisoning and massive kidney stones that had to be surgically removed. So, these are actually well-known phenomena. You read nutrition books from 100 years ago, like Adele Davis, who's a very famous nutritionist and extremely bright. I mean, she figured out a lot of things long before other people did. Grew up with her books. We had all her books in my house when I was growing up. And, looking back at some of these things, she was spot on with it. First of all, she said, you need to eat meat. Liver, like raw liver, was one of the best foods for pregnant women or breastfeeding women and kids that are developing. And she talked about oxalates in spinach. She said that they only say, that you don't just eat raw spinach. That wasn't what was done. What you did is you poached them in milk, and the calcium from the milk would actually leach out the oxalates and bind them, and then you could eat the spinach more safely because it lowered that toxic load. And that's the thing. We had these traditional ways of eating plants in order to lower the toxic load and increase the bioavailability of the nutrients so that we could at least gain some benefit from eating them. We have studies from the 1950s looking at spinach because they actually have a lot of calcium in spinach. And I've spoken to people now that said, oh yeah, my doctor told me to eat a lot of spinach because I needed calcium. It's like, okay. Well, the studies actually showed that if you give people spinach, it actually lowers their calcium because the calcium in the spinach is not available. We don't have the enzymes to break them down. They're not bioavailable. And so, because we're not designed to eat spinach, very plainly, that's all the proof that you need, really. And they contain oxalates, which get into your bloodstream and actually bind and strip out and chelate your calcium. And then you end up lowering your calcium levels. So that's actually what the data shows. That's what the scientific experimental studies have shown. And yet you say, oh, there's calcium in spinach. Eat a bunch of calcium. Sorry, that's not how plants work. So you get everything you need in the proportion that you need it from meat. there are things that you need in meat that you cannot get from plants, but there's nothing in plants that you cannot get from meat. And well, nothing that you need anyway. There's nothing deleterious in meat. There are literally over 1 million things that are deleterious in plants. So that's why you want to eat meat and you don't want to eat plants.
I want to ask you a question about you, because people, I think when they come to carnivore, you are one of the top experts that they look up to. How did you get interested in the carnivore diet, and when did you start?
So I started about 24 years ago when I was taking cancer biology. I'd already taken biology, I'd already taken botany, and understood these concepts that plants defend themselves. I mean, that was something I literally learned in 7th grade. Biology was that plants and animals are in an evolutionary arms race. Plants becoming more and more toxic, so less and less animals can eat them so they can survive and thrive. That's their defense mechanism. And then animals becoming more and more adapted to specific poisons in specific plants so they can eat that plant and survive and thrive. But they don't have the defenses for other things. So it was taught to us if an animal didn't evolve to eat a specific plant, that plant would be harmful to them because they didn't have the defenses against the specific toxins in those plants. And they didn't have the biomachinery and biomechanics to break down these chemical bonds and release all the nutrients, so it wouldn't be very nutritious for them. And then you go home, you get told to eat salads. You're like, oh, okay, I'm supposed to do this now, So you just don't think about it. I learned in 2nd grade that humans are apex predators and been apex predators for over 2 million years. Apex predators are by definition carnivores, and you learn in biology how toxic plants are, and so you have apex predators and plants are toxic, and then you get told you should be vegetarian. It was just like there's just like this intellectual disconnect that all of us had this information available to us since we were young, and none of us put that connection together until more recently. And so when I was taking cancer biology during my undergraduate degree, I was at the University of Washington, and I remember very clearly our professor of cancer biology was telling us again about plant toxins and how they defend themselves. But some of these toxins would cause disruption physiologically, inflammatory sort of ways or whatever, and could precipitate cancer, aka they had carcinogens in them. And so he told us that these toxins in plants could be carcinogenic, and obviously it's a cancer biology class, so that's what we were looking at. And he told us that Brussels sprouts had 136 known carcinogens, that mushrooms had over 100, that spinach, kale, lettuce, broccoli, celery, cabbage, cucumber, you name it, all the fruits and vegetables that you'd ever eat had 60, 80, or over 100 known carcinogens in them, and they were quite abundant. We knew from the work out of UC Berkeley from Professor Bruce Ames that 99.99% of the pesticides that existed in plants that you got from eating plants were naturally occurring, that the plant made themselves. So that means that there's 10,000 times more naturally occurring toxins in the fruits and vegetables that we eat by weight than the pesticides we spray on them. And they were far more dangerous. Just the mushrooms were, I think it was over 200 times more carcinogenic than the pesticides that we're looking at the time, which was ALAR. This is actually before glyphosate, so who knows how that stacks up. I'm not saying that's good, but the plants are actually worse than at least the pesticides that Bruce Ames was looking at. Interestingly, Bruce Ames concluded that said, well, since we know fruits and vegetables are so good for you, and the fruits and vegetables are way worse than the pesticides, obviously the pesticides can't be all that bad. So we should just keep using pesticides. It's not a problem. It's like, well, that's not what I took from that. And that's an opinion, it's assuming a fact that's not in evidence. He's assuming that fruits and vegetables are good for you. But what the data showed was that they're actually 10,000 times more toxins than the pesticides we're spraying on them. And the pesticides we spray pesticides on crops in order to kill animals and insects trying to eat them. So these are known deadly poisons, and the plants are worse. So, why would you come to the conclusion that, well, since fruits and vegetables are so good, obviously these pesticides are great too. I came to the opposite conclusion, and so did my professor of cancer biology. But at the time, we were extremely shocked. We hadn't heard this before, really. Hadn't put it into the context of the plants that we eat, even though we had all taken biology classes that would have said that plants defend themselves chemically. And we were blown away. We didn't know if he was joking or not. We were looking around for someone who was like laughing in the corner or something, and but nothing. Everyone was as shocked as I was, and we all sort of settled down and realized he was serious. And then I remember thinking in my head, but vegetables are still good for you though, right? And he just gave us a funny look, and he just said, I don't eat salad. I don't eat vegetables. I don't let my kids eat vegetables. Plants are trying to kill you. And I'm like, right, forget plants. And I just stopped, and I sort of defaulted into eating just carnivore because what else was I going to eat? My whole mission was to not eat plants. And so I went to the store. I'm like, okay, if it had a plant, I'm not touching it. And so I just ended up eating eggs and meat, and that was it. That was the only thing that didn't come from plants, and a bit of dairy, but I didn't have all that much. But that was my criteria. There's no plants. That's it. And I did that for a number of years and never felt better and never performed better as an athlete or as a student. And then I slipped off of it when I was playing rugby in England, and just sort of eventually sort of slipped back into my normal diet, which was a very clean, heavily meat-based omnivorous diet where I eat mostly meat and eat a bloody salad because you're supposed to eat salad and it's supposed to be good for you. So I'm like, oh gosh, okay, I'll eat that stupid thing. And that's what I kept eating, and I did not feel as good. I did not feel nearly as good. I wasn't the same athlete. I got tired more easily. I got injured more easily. I got these nagging sort of pulled muscles and issues going forward. And I had no idea what was going on, because at 25 I felt like a superhero, and 25 and a half I did not. And I couldn't figure out how to get back to that until I was 38. So 13 years later, when I came back to information and said, no, humans just are carnivores as a species. It's just what type of animal we are. And I looked back and said, okay, well, that's how I was living. And I've never felt better in my entire life. And I've always been trying to figure out how to get back to that. And that was it. And so I said, great, get rid of these, screw plants, get rid of these stupid things. And I did that. And again, within 2 weeks, I felt like I was 22 again. I felt like I was my old self again. I went back out and started playing high level rugby. It just felt great. And then I really started digging into this and looking into the research behind it. And I found that it was absolute mountains of this stuff. I mean, even just on ketogenic diets alone, what is a ketogenic diet? You get rid of carbohydrates. What do you replace it with? Protein and fat. Where do you get protein and fat from? Well, the best sources are meat, and that's typically what they use in these studies. And so, and the ones that have better outcomes certainly do. I mean, I've seen some studies try to trash ketogenic diets by giving a bunch of rats a ketogenic diet, and we checked it. Their ketones are up, so they're definitely in ketosis. And the fat that they're giving them is Crisco, right? Which is hydrogenated vegetable oil. Is an industrial product that was first used by the German military to oil their war machines. And then they just, Procter & Gamble just decided to start feeding it to people, right? Okay, well, how did that one turn out? Not great. So, people are arguing, I think very, very correctly, that things like Crisco are not good for your health. So doing a ketogenic diet with freaking pounds of Crisco, probably not going to give the best outcomes. So that's not really accurate. But you have literally thousands of studies and randomized controlled trials in humans on the benefits of ketogenic diets for specific medical outcomes with selected, pre-selected endpoints. So they're not retroactively going back and saying this is our endpoint. And a lot of drug companies do that. A lot of big industry studies do that, where they'll run a study like glyphosate, for example. One of the studies that the industry studies that they use to get this passed to use this on food crops was they fed glyphosate covered food to mice for 3 months, and they said, look, they're fine. There's no issues. Great. We can feed this to people. Okay. Well, someone tried to reproduce that study later and started doing the same thing, but didn't stop at 3 months, actually went to the natural extension of these animals' lives. And they found massive, massive health issues and multi-organ failure and damage and other sorts of issues. And so, picking too small of a test run, or maybe running this out and seeing how'd this work, and start seeing, okay, we're seeing problems at around month 4. Okay, well, month 3 was great, so just cut it there. That happens all the time. It's completely dishonest, but it is very common practice. There are 2 editors in chief, one from the Lancet and one from New England Journal of Medicine, 2 of the top medical journals in the world. There's Dr. Horton and I can't remember the other lady's name. I think it was Dr. Marcia Engel or something like that. But anyway, she was editor in chief of the New England Journal for 15 years or so. They both came out publicly and said that there's just industry capture on these papers and journals, and that because of all these fraudulent and dishonest practices with making papers and publishing them in dishonest ways, and manipulating the data in different ways, that you really couldn't trust medical literature anymore, the scientific literature anymore, even in the top journals, especially in the top journals. And he said that most of it is completely corrupt or fully fraudulent and false. And he said at least half of the papers being published fit that description, that they're either completely false or fraudulent. And his words, he said, this is a dark day for science. And that's what we're living in. So when you look for yourself and you say, okay, well, what are the studies here? Well, we have thousands and thousands of studies, high-level studies, looking at high-fat, meat-based ketogenic diets, which a carnivore diet is. Then you actually see that, well, maybe this is a different story than what we're being told. And it's not taught in medical school. It's not taught in residencies. And so you talk to doctors, well, there's no evidence for that. Well, have you looked for the evidence? And the answer, of course, is no, because if it hasn't been taught to them in medical school or in residency, or it's not being presented at these conferences that are funded by Nestle, Coke, Pepsi, Kellogg's, Pfizer, Merck, Novo Nordisk, then obviously it's not worth talking about, right? So if it's not spoon-fed to you, it's not good enough to learn about. Actually, generally, the good information is something you have to go find yourself. It's not just going to be handed to you. And it's there, So, I get people saying that, oh, well, you can't say that these sorts of dietary interventions, help with Crohn's disease because there's no evidence for that. Like, well, have you looked? I mean, just go on PubMed and just put in Crohn's disease ketogenic diets. You will find a mass of studies, and you look for other keywords, looking for dietary interventions, and can this help with Crohn's disease or whatever disease? You will find these things. It's just there's no product behind it. So there's no multinational, multi-trillion-dollar company pushing it, right? Multi-billion, but they have their revenue is as an industry is multi-trillion, and so that's how I got into this, because I saw the lie. I saw how massively effective this was, not only for myself and my family, but for my patients. I saw diseases that I was taught are incurable. They're chronic conditions. They only get worse. Go away. I saw them completely disappear. People come off medications, be able to deprescribe them and have them heal. I mean, that's what medicine is about. That's why you become a doctor. You're supposed to be a healer, not a drug pusher, but we've turned into a medical sales force that we're just there to sell pills, sell pills, sell pills, sell pills. That's not what medicine is. Medicine is getting people healthy. Diabetes is not a metformin deficiency, and Crohn's disease is not a Humira deficiency. So we need to find the root cause. And I think in large part, these chronic diseases are caused by eating the wrong kinds of food, as evidenced by the fact that our pets, zoo animals, and any other animal that starts being fed the same crap that we're eating gets the same diseases we're getting, right? And that includes humans as well. This is a well-known phenomenon in anthropology, where pre-agricultural societies, like the Maasai, like the Inuit, like the Native Americans in the Great Plains, like the Australian Aboriginals, that when they are living in their natural ways, that the medical issues that they get are injuries, childbirth, poisonings, and those sorts of things, right? Infectious disease. And then when they transition to a post-agricultural society, those aren't the major burden of illnesses. Major burden of illnesses are the diseases of civilization. What the hell is that? It's diabetes, it's cancer, it's heart disease, it's dementia, it's autoimmunity. That doesn't exist in these populations. People say, well, they just don't live long enough. Okay. There are kids having heart attacks now. I have a friend of mine who's a doctor, ER doctor in India, and he's seeing teenagers who are vegetarian, traditional vegetarian people in India, eating a traditional Indian vegetarian diet, that he's having teenagers, like a 17-year-old boy came in with a heart attack. 26-year-old woman came in with a stroke. Okay, so you're living plenty long for that. But actually, they live just as long as us, if not longer, as long as they're not killed by something. So average life expectancy from birth may be lower, but when people talk about the Maasai, they only live 60 years. Well, that's average life expectancy from birth. And 60 is plenty of time to develop diabetes. I mean, we've got 10-year-olds getting type 2 diabetes since the 90s, right? So obviously, that's plenty of time to do that, especially if meat is causing this and they're only eating meat, then obviously they should be having this when they're 2, but they're not. They don't get it at all. And when you look at how long they live, if they just die of old age and don't get killed by something, they live as long or longer than us. And there was an anthropologist from, I think it was Arizona State University, and he studied these native tribes in the Amazon. And he said, no, those people live just as long, if not longer than us. They don't get any of these chronic diseases. And it's only when they're killed by something that they live shorter than that. But when you're talking about living out the natural lifespan, they actually live as long or longer than people in Western countries. So, and then you see the opposite. When you see these populations living in cities, eating the way we do, and they get sick, and then they go back home and they start living a more natural existence, all of a sudden those diseases go away again. We see this. I was speaking to a patient of mine, and she has, and she works with the Australian Aboriginal community, and she said that that's actually a well-known thing, that in that population, in that community, if you're in the cities and you're getting sick and you're getting diabetes and you're getting cancer and do these sorts of things, the thing you do is you go back into the bush and live with your relatives out there. You start living in a more traditional manner, and these problems go away. And so, it's right there in front of us. All we have to do is look.
As Dr. Chaffee mentions, if you want to fix chronic disease, we need to fix what we eat, and incorporating a high-fat carnivore diet, even focusing on protein and fat. Now, what we eat is just one part of overall health. Another very important aspect of overall health is our mental health. And by that, I mean things like past trauma, stress, and emotional eating. Now, this is something that I experienced for most of my life. For many years, I suffered with severe emotional eating, even reaching for healthy sugars just to feel okay. And what I found completely fixed me, along with a high-fat carnivore diet, was to understand my emotions through therapy. Through speaking with a therapist, I was better able to understand my triggers that led to the stress and the emotional eating. And my therapist gave me incredible strategies to help me deal with these events. Things like gratitude, slow breathing, guided meditation, just to name a few. And this has helped me so much. And that is why I have BetterHelp as a sponsor of today's video. BetterHelp is on a mission to make starting therapy easier. All you have to do is fill out a questionnaire and you'll be matched with a therapist in as little as a couple of days. One of the best things about BetterHelp is that if the first therapist doesn't feel quite right, you can easily switch to another one until you find someone that you truly connect with. They are all about creating the best experience for you. So if you feel that you're struggling and you might benefit from therapy, just head to betterhelp.com/ Primal Podcast and get 10% off your first month of therapy. I want to talk about some concerns that people have when they start a carnivore diet, because it sounds very common sense. Eat protein, eat fat, these diseases that we have go away. But people have concerns. First one is cholesterol, which I'm sure that you've heard of. LDL cholesterol seems to increase on a carnivore diet. Is that a concern for people?
I don't know why it would, since it's associated with longer life and lower all-cause mortality and less cardiovascular disease and less death from infectious disease and lower rates of death from cancer and things like that, lower rates of Alzheimer's, lower rates of Parkinson's, lower rates of dementia, and the list goes on. There has never been any experimental data showing that cholesterol of any form, be it total cholesterol, LDL cholesterol, SD-LDL cholesterol, ApoB, what have you. There's no experimental data showing a cause and effect relationship between any cholesterols and cardiovascular disease. None. It's never been done. Those studies have been performed, but they disproved or went against the cholesterol heart hypothesis. So there's never been a high-level randomized controlled trial that showed a cause and effect relationship between cholesterol and cardiovascular disease. But there have been at least 5 large-scale randomized controlled trials with thousands of human subjects in a well-designed, well-controlled study that have shown the opposite. They've shown either no benefit from replacing animal fats with polyunsaturated vegetable oils and margarine and things like that, lowering cholesterol, and no benefit to that from a cardiovascular sense. And 2 of them show the larger, better designed studies actually showed that when you lowered animal fat and replaced it with plant oils and margarines and lowered LDL cholesterol, that you actually more people died of heart attacks and strokes as a result. So these would be things like the Minnesota coronary experiment that had nearly 10,000 subjects in it. And it was a 5-year study, went from 1968 to 1973. And this was, our good friend Ansel Keys, who's well known to be on the payroll for the sugar companies. He was on the cover of Time magazine, having pushed the cholesterol heart hypothesis. And so he did this study, really hoping for a win here with cholesterol and heart disease, and they found the opposite. And so, like any good scientist that had good ethics and ethical grounding, he buried it and hid it from public and wouldn't let it be published. 4 decades later, long after he was dead and rotting in the ground, burning in hell, I hope, other people from the NIH actually found, it was actually Ramsden from the NIH actually found sort of evidence that this study had been done, and tracked down some of the children from one of the other lead researchers on the study, and I said, "Hey, do you have your dad's old stuff? I'm looking. I heard this study was done. I heard he did it. And looking for some of this stuff." And they actually found all the data from this study, from 5 years of this study, in the basement in their dad's old things. And so that was published in, I think it was the BMJ, the British Medical Journal. I believe it was in 2014. And so that's available for anybody to look up. The Minnesota coronary experiment, or the LA Veterans Affairs Hospital study, the Sydney heart trial. All of these things showed that that the cholesterol heart hypothesis was not correct. It certainly didn't corroborate them. And so the only studies that are available that show a link between cholesterol and heart disease are epidemiological and correlative. So these can only generate a hypothesis. They're hypothesis generating, but they cannot show a cause and effect relationship. Now they've started trotting out these Mendelian randomized trials. But just because you use the word randomized does not mean it's a randomized controlled trial, does not mean it's experimental trial, does not mean it can show a cause and effect relationship. Cannot. It's still epidemiological. It's highly flawed, and many, many, many top scientists, not including myself, have done very robust critiques and the flaws of these study designs. and shown very clearly these cannot show a cause and effect relationship. You cannot show a cause and effect relationship without experimental study where you change one variable and see what happens. Can't. Right. So this is still epidemiology. This is still observation. It's actually quite poor epidemiology. It's not going to be very accurate. And, people can look up any number of critiques and reviews on that. Dr. Zoe Harcum has done plenty of those, and actually just came up with another one more recently, and she's fantastic. So there are plenty of people showing that this is just not going to show a cause-effect relationship. But we already have those studies. We already have studies that can show a cause and effect relationship, and they show no cause. They show no cause and effect relationship between cholesterol and cardiovascular disease. And in fact, some of them show an inverse relationship, meaning that if you lower cholesterol and you lower saturated or cholesterol and animal fat, that more people die from cardiovascular disease as a result of that. Also, there's a meta-analysis with 44 randomized controlled trials in it that actually showed that people on a high-fat, meat-based ketogenic diet, that actually it was the healthier people with lower BMI that actually had higher LDL cholesterol, and that as you got larger BMI, it actually went down. So it sort of went down sharply and sort of leveled off. And then as you got into the extremes of obesity, it actually, LDL even went down further, right? Okay, so why is that? These people are typically less healthy. It's associated with poorer health outcomes and being obese, and yet they have lower LDL. Okay, so it's good. Everyone should get obese then, I guess, is heart healthy. Well, we know that's not true. So the lower BMI individuals that are typically more metabolically healthy and healthier in other ways, they're the ones that had higher LDL. So you have your biochemical markers improving, and we see this in people on carnivore diet and ketogenic diets. They improve massively. Diabetes goes away, autoimmunity goes away, all these other sorts of issues get better and better and better and better and better. But everyone goes to that sticking point. Oh my goodness, LDL. Okay, well, not everybody's LDL goes up. In fact, people that are less healthy, it goes down. Okay, but if all your markers and all your biomarkers getting better, and you've lost 200 pounds, 300 pounds, 400 pounds, there's a lady an Australian named Limitless Lindy that's lost 500 pounds, right? Documented. She documented it the entire way. 500 pounds. Okay, you're telling me that her cholesterol being slightly up compared to what we consider normal, and everything else being better, that she needs to just go back to what she was doing before and put back on the 500 pounds because she's at such a high risk for heart disease now. That doesn't make any sense. Like everything is showing that she's improving her health. And you're telling me that the high LDL is now it's going to kill her. That's what's going to kill her. Everything's getting better. So actually that's associated with better health and improving health. So why are we saying that that's a bad thing? I think that's a good thing. And that's what a lot of these large population studies show, is that higher cholesterol and higher LDL cholesterol actually improves health outcomes and lowers it, or is associated with a lower all-cause mortality rate, meaning that they live longer. And so that's really all you need to know. I mean, this was a complete and utter fraud. People like Ansel Keys perpetuated this fraud for money. And we know that. We have hard evidence of it. The Journal of the American Medical Association, one of the top medical journals in the world, published the internal memos from the sugar companies back in the 60s detailing how they paid off 3 Harvard professors to falsify data and publish fraudulent studies to make it appear as if cholesterol caused heart disease, when it was much more likely to be sugar and certainly cigarettes and things like that. And then they exonerated sugar and said that it was safe. And then one of those professors was named head of the USDA, and he was the one who authored and published the USDA declaration in the late 70s saying that the cholesterol caused heart disease, saturated fat, grease, cholesterol, stop eating both. Oh my goodness. Then we look at that. So that we know that's a fraud. We know that's a lie. The Framingham study tried to suggest or people said that the Framingham study said that higher levels of cholesterol was associated with higher cardiovascular disease mortality rates. But in fact, that was actually what the American Heart Association claimed it showed, when in fact the original data showed the opposite, that as you lowered total cholesterol, you increased cardiovascular disease mortality rate. Then more recently, the Journal of the American College of Cardiology, the top cardiology journal in the world, they published an umbrella review, which is the tip top pointy bit of the pyramid of the evidence hierarchy pyramid, right? You have randomized control trials, high quality ones. You can do crap randomized control trials. But let's say you have high quality ones, put those into a meta-analysis. You have crappy ones, you put that in a meta-analysis, you'll get a crappy meta-analysis, garbage in, garbage out. But let's say you have high quality meta-analysis, randomized controlled trials, do high quality meta-analyses. Then over the years, you get a number of other meta-analyses of high quality randomized controlled trials. Then you say, okay, well, let's do a meta-analysis of those meta-analyses. That's called an umbrella review. So it's the tippy top point of that pyramid, as good as you're going to get. And one of these was published in the Journal of the American College of Cardiology in 2020. And they looked at all the best evidence available for saturated fat being causative or linked at all to cardiovascular disease. And they found absolutely no connection whatsoever in the highest levels of evidence between increased saturated fat consumption and cardiovascular disease. And in fact, they found an inverse relationship between saturated fat consumption and strokes. So people that ate more saturated fat had less strokes. People that ate less saturated fat had more strokes. So any way you want to slice it, we have been absolutely lied to and misled. In fact, just look at the 2015 U.S. nutrition guidelines, dietary guidelines. In 2015, they actually dropped the recommendation to limit saturated fat and cholesterol, dietary cholesterol, because they said there's absolutely no connection between dietary saturated fat and cholesterol and any poor health outcome, including cardiovascular disease. So that's already in the guidelines, and people just forget that. And so when you look at the vegan mafia who cherry pick and desperately try to defend their ideology because it's indefensible, so they have to lie and revert to character assassination, as one of the Schumpeter said, that the first thing that people do to protect their ideology is lie. And Thomas Sowell said, and the second thing they do is character assassination. So they do steps 1, 2, and they invented 4 and 5, 3, 4, and 5 as well. But they're looking at this and saying that they're trying to defend their ideology on how this can possibly be, but it's really indefensible. We have mountains of evidence that saturated fat does not cause a problem. Cholesterol does not cause a problem. I mean, again, you look at that it's in the guidelines already by 2015, and no one really thought about it. And so these people will say, well, look at the recommendations from the European Council on the subject. And it's just like, well, why don't you use the U.S. ones? You're just skipping over the fact that those got taken out. They're not recommending you limit your calories at saturated fat to 10%. That got removed in 2015. And in fact, the JACC, the Journal of the American College of Cardiology, they said explicitly, like this, there should be no arbitrary upper limit on the consumption of saturated fat. And the lead authors on that paper had previously been on the panels that recommended limits on saturated fat consumption. And so this is them saying, hey, we got it wrong. This is what the data actually shows. And so they circumvent that and say, oh, well, and they make excuses about that study. And then they say, well, look at the European recommendations. Well, that's expert opinion. That's literally the lowest rank of evidence, and you're dismissing the highest rank of evidence in favor of the lowest rank of evidence, and ignoring the fact that other expert opinion, like the USA 2015 guidelines, said, yeah, don't worry about dietary saturated fat and cholesterol. It's completely a non-issue.
Very complete answer. I want to ask about the microbiome. People are going to be concerned around, well, I need a diverse microbiome. Is the carnivore diet enough to have a diverse microbiome? What are your thoughts?
Well, you can ask the Inuit, and people have done studies on them when they're eating just meat, and they find out actually they have an extremely diverse and healthy microbiome. In fact, I've spoken to experts on the microbiome, and they say they love the carnivore diet because you get such a healthy gut bacteria, and that's what a lot of people are finding. Moving to a carnivore diet later in life, not being born into it, like some populations, some lucky bastards are, and they're finding that they're massively improving the health of their microbiome. In fact, there was we're seeing this just all over the place, and many people are publishing this. Dr. Ken Berry has published this. Benazati's published this. Dr. Sean O'Mara has published this, and in fact, Dr. Sean O'Mara, his microbiome was so good that the president or whomever of the company that he used to test his microbiome personally called him and said, "You have the best microbiome our company has ever tested. What the hell are you doing?" He's like, "All right, I'll tell you." And Benazati, who's been doing a clean, omnivorous, ketogenic diet, so high-fat, meat-based, but with vegetables, fruits and vegetables and all that sort of stuff, with all this lovely fiber and blah, blah, blah. And he'd been doing it for years. And so he checked his microbiome, and he said it was good, but it wasn't great. And then the recommendations were that he should eat less meat, eat less red meat in particular, and eat more fruits and vegetables and fiber. And so he said he did the exact opposite and stopped eating all fiber and pretty much only ate red meat. 3 months later, he said his microbiome was exemplary. It had improved dramatically in every category, and that it actually showed up that had 6 new species of microbe that were extremely healthy that showed up that weren't there before. So he's like, okay, explain that one. Where'd those ones come from? So we are seeing a lot of improvements. The other thing we should always remember is that our understanding of the microbiome is still in its infancy. I worked with an anesthesiology and an intensivist here in Australia who works in the ICU, runs the ICU, and very bright guy, very nice gentleman, and but his main work really is studying the microbiome. And he, as of 2019, he had over 200 peer-reviewed publications on the microbiome. And speaking to him about that, he said that once we figure out, how the hell the microbiome works and how to improve it, we will really be able to do a lot, with people's health, and we'll really know a lot about medicine. Once we understand. Right. So this is a guy who's published over 200 papers on the subject. And he's saying, we don't understand this yet. We don't know how to manipulate it. We don't know how to improve it. We don't even know what improved necessarily looks like. We're just figuring this stuff out. It's still very much in its infancy. So if that guy has the humility and the knowledge to say, look, we really don't know enough about this yet to make any definitive statements. No one else should be making that statement either. But what we do see in the studies that have been done with native populations like the Inuit is that the microbiome is extremely healthy, and that when people go to a meat-only diet, ours become extremely healthy, which would make sense. If we're eating what we're designed to eat, we should have the microbiome and oral biome that we should have. And this is something that we notice too. When eating carbohydrates, and we know about sugar, but it's all carbohydrates. All carbohydrates are sugars. Carbohydrates are sugars, right? Complex sugars or simple sugars, etc. But they're sugars. And the bacteria that eat the sugars are the ones that cause cavities in humans. Okay, so if your teeth are rotting out of your head, probably not eating the right thing. I mean, what animal in nature has rotten teeth? Typically none, because if you lose your teeth, you lose the ability to eat and you die, right? You can't fight off predators. You can't defend yourself. You can't, get mating rights necessarily. You can't eat is the main thing, right? You lose your teeth, you lose the ability to eat, and you die. So koalas, for instance, they don't regrow their teeth. And so they grow their teeth once and then they get worn down to little nubbins, and it's a very tough fibrous plant, eucalyptus. And so eating this their whole life, they typically don't just die of old age and fall over and whatever. They go until they wear their teeth down to nothing, and then they starve to death. It's not really a nice way to go. So when your teeth don't work and your teeth rot out of your head, you're done. And the teeth of animals, even though they're dirty, they don't have dentists. They're, crocodiles just sitting there in swamp water with its mouth open. Like, come on. If their teeth are going to rot out, they're done. Okay, so why are our teeth rotting out? Why are we having so many dental problems? Because we're eating the wrong things. And so we have the wrong oral biome as well. And so, by extension, we probably have the wrong microbiome, because the bacteria in your mouth get into the food that you chew up and then swallow. And some of that can possibly bypass the noxious stomach acid that we have and get passed into your lower intestine. So that's probably where Ben's 6 new microbes came from, which is probably from his oral biome. And, so that makes sense. What you eat is going to feed the bacteria in your body, either in your mouth or in your intestine. And so if you're eating the food that you're designed to have, you should be feeding and promoting the bacteria that you are designed to have as well. So it makes perfect sense that that would be the case.
I want to ask you about blood sugar. Some people have a persistent increase in blood sugar when they do a carnivore diet. Some people's blood sugar drops, which is normal and fine. Why is it that some people have an increase in blood sugar persistently?
Well, I would have to sort of see them case by case, because it is extremely rare, and it also depends on how you're testing these sorts of things. I've actually never had a patient, and I test hundreds of people's bloods all the time when going on a carnivore diet, and do preliminary blood work when they come in. Then we look at this. Often they're diabetic or pre-diabetic, and we say, okay, look, this is something that is going to be really important to you. Looking into therapeutic carbohydrate restriction, and they may have other sorts of things where I say, well, actually, I think that it would be really important to actually exclude plants as well, especially with autoimmunity, et cetera. And we have large clinical trials in humans showing that ketogenic diets, high-fat, meat-based ketogenic diets, they reverse diabetes. So I've never seen anybody actually have persistently high blood sugar. I've seen people's HbA1c not go down as much as you would, as other people would, and there can be reasons for that, such as persistent stress, poor sleep, stress, these sorts of things. They could also just not actually be doing a ketogenic carnivore diet. They could be including other things in their diet. That would be my first guess, but my patients, I've never seen that. If that were to happen to me, people should understand as well that we do know from clinical data that if you average 5 hours of sleep or less a night for just 7 nights in a row, you will actually give yourself prediabetes. So you'll elevate your blood sugar, and this is due to the cortisol that's released, and the massive amounts of cortisol that's released, and that deranges your metabolism, and you get prediabetes. So I would have to take all of those in a case by case basis. But the first thing I'd be looking at, are you actually eating the way that we discussed? And I always ask, what exactly are you eating? Quite often you'll find some things in there that is just like, okay, well, you need to take those things out, and you take those out and the problem goes away. If, that's a big if, they're actually only eating fatty meat and water, and they're still having persistently high blood sugar, I'd be looking at sleep. I'd be looking at stress as the main focal points. But again, I really haven't seen that in anybody clinically.
Another concern that people have is not being able to lose weight on a carnivore diet. Why do you think people might be gaining weight or not being able to lose weight on carnivore?
Oh, well, I mean, that comes up. It's actually the exception, not the rule. A lot of people do lose weight fairly readily. We do need to remember that weight is different than fat loss. What people want is they want to lose fat. They don't want to lose weight. So a lot of people mistake the two. And so they do things like taking Ozempic or Wegovy, those sorts of things. And they take those drugs and it paralyzes their stomach so they physically can't eat anymore, just like if they got bariatric surgery. But then they haven't changed their eating habits, so they're eating really poorly. And they lose weight, but actually 40% of that weight is actually lean body mass. So it's muscle, bone, healthy tissue that you really can't afford to lose. And then people typically regain that weight, but they regain it in fat. And so they don't regain their lean body mass. And that's really bad. So it's not important to lose weight. It's important to lose fat. And so when people are exercising, they're lifting weights, they're making healthier decisions with their diet, and they might make healthier decisions with their lifestyle as well. They could very easily be putting on muscle, especially if they're working out, actively. And so if they're putting on muscle and they're losing fat, it might actually offset. They may not lose all that much weight at all. So it may not be an actual stall. Could just be that their body habitus is reforming. So sometimes people testing their waist circumference, which you actually have to do laying down, by the way. You have to be on your back and then take a tape measure and put that around the level of your belly button and measure it that way. That's what's more accurate. And so it may be that you're staying the same weight or even gaining weight, but your waist circumference is going down, 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 down. Right? Okay. Well, then don't worry about it. You're losing fat and you're gaining muscle. Okay. So that's fine. If you are really not changing your body habits, like you got a DEXA scan and you're just like, no, I'm not losing any fat. That can be for a few reasons, but one of the main ones is that when people are doing all these starvation diets in different sorts of ways of limiting what they're eating, they're getting surgery, they're taking medications, they're just starving themselves, you're going to trash your metabolism. Your body doesn't know that you're just trying to slim down and fit into a smaller dress size. All your body knows are inputs and outputs. And so your body's telling you it's hungry, it needs nutrition, and you're not bringing it in. There's no animal on earth that when hungry will not eat their optimal food when it's sitting there in front of them. And so it's sending the signal saying, hey, you're hungry, you need to eat. And there's no food coming in. And so your body just goes, right, we're in a famine. We're struggling. It's winter. There's something going on here. And we need to slow down the metabolism. And we see this. There was something called the Minnesota starvation trial, which our good friend Ansel Keys went around starving people like they were in concentration camps. Probably got a sick joy out of it. I don't know. I really don't like the guy, obviously. Some people are much more generous to him. Obviously, he had to do some good work, or else he wouldn't have had a reputation to sell to the highest bidder. But I really think that he's done so much harm to the world that he's really irredeemable. But the Minnesota starvation trial happened during World War II. They want to see, okay, if people are just really not, if we had to like severely ration, if there's a protracted war, how little can people live and what happens afterwards with refeeding and things like that. So they starved the hell out of people, and sure, they lost a lot of weight, but then it plateaued and they stopped losing weight, and they were able to maintain, what you would figure that you would see in a concentration camp, but they were able to maintain that and survive on food that should have killed them, really. And that's because the metabolism slowed down. And in fact, they found in that study that eating the way they were eating so little that if it was just about calories in, calories out, they would have lost more weight than they started with and just ceased to exist, or, AKA died. And they didn't. The body was able to adapt and adjust. There's all life on Earth can deal with a famine because there are famines. And so all species have had to weather famines at some point. Even bacteria have to do this at some stage. And so if you're not able to do that, you die, right? So we do this on purpose, and our metabolism slows down. If you look at The Biggest Loser, that show, they lost a whole bunch of weight. The classic sort of thing, eat 2 celery sprouts and, crush yourself on the elliptical or something like that. In fact, I had a lady who was on that show, and she said it was actually it was a lot worse than that, that the producers were really encouraging like disordered eating and eating disorders and things like that, because they just wanted results. They just wanted people losing a ton of weight. And, but they checked the metabolic rate of these people, and it absolutely was trashed. So yeah, a lot of people lost weight just like they did in the starvation trials, but they absolutely trashed their metabolism. And then they checked them 6 years later. They'd all regained the weight and their metabolisms had not recovered. They were still bottomed out. And this is why you get yo-yo dieting, right? So you starve yourself for a while, you lose some weight, but then it plateaus and you're like, okay, I'm starving myself. I'm miserable. I hate this. And I'm not even losing weight anymore. Well, this is stupid. And you get very discouraged and you start eating other ways. And then wham, your weight goes up and you actually regain more weight than you lost because your metabolism is just depressed. Your body's like, we just went through a famine. We need to store up for the winter because that's just what we're doing. Like a bear getting obese for the winter and then sleeping it off. Your body's just like, okay, well, we need to survive. We're going into the next famine's right around the corner. We need to store everything that we can. That's how you survive. And so then you're going into a proper diet that's actually fit for humans, and your metabolism is still crushed. It can take time to recover. I check people, different sort of signs of metabolic health, like their fasting insulin. You can check glucose as well. Also things like leptin, leptin. That's a really important hormone. That's a satiety hormone. And people that have elevated leptin, so they have leptin resistance is what it's called, that they'll actually find that's associated with a slower metabolism. So is higher, insulin resistance. So higher the insulin, the slower the metabolism, and the higher the leptin, the slower the metabolism as well. And there's other markers as well. There's actually quite a few, but those are some interesting ones that you can keep track of. Fasting insulin, if you go ketogenic, you go on a ketogenic carnivore diet, that will come down fairly quickly. And I've seen extremely elevated fasting insulin levels that start to correct straight away and even, massively correct within a few months. And, but it can take time depending on how high it is. But it does come down once you stop eating carbohydrates and all this other garbage. So that starts coming down. Leptin takes a lot longer than that. And so if you have elevated leptin, just understand that you have a slowed metabolism from whatever life choices you've made before. And you could be one of these slow burners that you have to wait for that leptin to come down before you're in the rest of your metabolism to perk up before your body starts letting go of your fat stores. So things that can cause leptin resistance. Insulin blocks leptin. It blocks it at the level of the hypothalamus. So the hypothalamus and feeds into the pituitary, and the hypothalamus and pituitary release a lot of major hormones that then go to testes in men, ovaries in women, adrenals in both, and they stimulate all these hormones coming out. Very important part of the brain. Leptin influences that and can actually influence the hypothalamus and the hormones then coming out of it. Insulin blocks leptin at the level of the hypothalamus. So not only are you feeling like you're starving all the time because leptin is the satiety hormone, so you don't know that you're satiated and you just keep eating because the signals that you're getting from your body is that you're starving and you need to keep eating. And insulin is the fat storage hormone. So as your insulin goes up, you're actually incapable of burning fat. People with an insulinoma that secretes a lot of insulin, they cannot burn fat. They just get enormously obese. It doesn't matter what they eat because everything that goes into their body just gets stored into fat. And people with type 1 diabetes don't make any insulin. They could eat 50,000 calories a day. They won't put on any fat at all. They will waste away until they die, right? So insulin is the fat storage hormone. You start eating carbohydrates, that raises insulin. You are going to store fat. You won't be able to burn fat, simple as. But, okay, why is it then when your insulin starts coming down? Well, your insulin could be elevated, right? So that needs to start coming down before your body's going to be able to access your fat stores. Once that comes down, you can have this derangement with your leptin as well. And that can be a sign of other metabolic issues. But insulin blocks leptin. Fructose blocks leptin, alcohol blocks leptin, and lectins, plant toxins called lectins, block leptin. And so you need to get rid of all these things. And when you do, that leptin starts coming down. That's another thing when people are stalling, like, oh, my blood sugar is this, or that's not really working, is, are you drinking alcohol? Because it's always assumed, it's not meat. So, obviously you should assume that, well, no, I'm doing a carnivore diet. I'm not having anything else. I'm not eating anything else. Are you drinking alcohol? Oh, I do drink alcohol. Yes. Okay. How often do you drink alcohol? Oh, well, I have, sort of, 3 or 4 beers. Okay. On the weekends or every day. Yeah. It's like, okay. So, that's obviously going to have an impact, isn't it? And so, but people don't necessarily think about those sorts of things. So that's one of the things that we see when you go into a ketogenic carnivore diet. Leptin, even if it's extremely elevated to the point that bariatric surgeons will just say, there's no way you can possibly lose weight with diet and exercise. It's not going to happen. You'll have to get surgery if you want to lose weight. That's not true, though. You can lose weight. It just has to be the right diet and exercise. It has to be ketogenic. And it's better if it's a plant-free ketogenic diet because you're going to cut out the plants with the lectins in it as well. And you will see that leptin come down, but it takes months, especially if it's very elevated. And so sometimes people won't lose weight while that leptin's up. Now, there's going to be other things going on too with their metabolism. And so, but that's a pretty good surrogate marker for your metabolism. So as that leptin comes down, once it gets down to low enough point and your metabolism has recovered to a certain extent, that's when you see weight just start dropping off. So I always counsel people and say, listen, most people lose weight pretty quickly, but not everybody does. And if you have high leptin, so you could be in that category where it's a much more slow burn. For some reason, women with elevated leptin are more commonly slower to lose weight. I don't know, but men got the long end of the stick on that one. It seems like a lot of men, even with high leptin, seem to do okay with losing fat more quickly. But a lot of women do too. I've had women that were in that range that bariatric surgeons would say, over 100, say there's no way in hell you can possibly lose weight, and they lose significant amount of weight straight away in the first few months, and then it just keeps losing weight after that. But if you're in that category where you're not really losing weight straight away, just understand that your metabolism takes time to heal and repair, and to focus on your health, because that's the most important thing. I know a lot of people come to these sorts of ways of eating because they want to lose weight, but really this is about your health. And as you improve your health, your weight will follow, your body habitus will follow. And so the most important thing is your health. That's what you need to focus on. How are you feeling? How is your energy, your mental health, your mental clarity, all these sorts of things? How's your diabetes doing? How's your autoimmunity doing? Are you coming off medications? Your blood pressure coming down? Those are the most important things. Very distant second is body composition. You could be losing fat and putting on muscle and not losing any weight, or even putting on weight. Most important thing is the health, though. Very distant second is the body composition. Nowhere on that list is weight, because weight doesn't tell you anything about health or body composition. And that's really important things to remember.
I want to talk about how to get faster or more optimal carnivore results. Let's first talk about what to eat and then things to avoid. What do we need to be eating on a carnivore diet?
The main things to remember is that this is a real carnivore diet, and the best version of a carnivore diet is strictly high-fat meat and water, and that's it. And so if you're not getting the results that you want, take a look at exactly what you're eating. If you're having some drinks on the weekend or every couple of weeks, or you're still having coffee and maybe you're putting in some artificial sweeteners, or maybe you're having some dairy or all these sorts of things, cut them out. Just cut them out. A lot of people think that a carnivore diet is just eating a lot more meat. Oh, I'm on a carnivore diet, I'm eating all this meat. Well, no, it's actually excluding all these other things. And that's where the main benefit comes from. You're not eating things that cause harm. And there are a lot of things that cause harm. Meat does not cause harm, so that's safe to eat. So you eat that, but you need to avoid all these other things. So if you want to get the best results, you need to exclude everything except fatty meat. Red meat especially is the best. Dairy is a classic stall. People using cheese or milk or these sorts of things. Milk has carbohydrates, so that's going to kick you out of ketosis. But also milk and milk products have something called casomorphins, which signal the baby animal to drink more, drink more, drink more, eat more, eat more, eat more, eat more, because you need to grow fast as a baby, because babies are vulnerable. The most commonly eaten thing in the wild are babies, unfortunately, which is really sad to think about, but that's the case. And that's because they're easy targets, right? They can't really defend themselves like an adult can. And so, which is why the adults have to protect their babies very, very carefully. And so, when we eat these casomorphines as an adult, it gives us the same signals: eat, 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 eat. In fact, I found a paper from the 1930s that talked about the best way to fatten up hogs for lard, because that was the main product from pigs, was lard. And it was to give them a combination of grains and skim milk. Skim milk, not full fat milk, skim milk. And skim milk was a byproduct of the cream and butter industry. It was literally a throwaway product, but they gave it to pigs, and they found that combination actually made them overeat. And so they said, there's nothing special in here that makes them fat. It just causes them to overeat. And they just keep eating and keep eating and keep eating, and they get extremely obese. And the carbohydrates raise insulin, and that tells them to store fat. And the casomorphines tell them to just keep eating. And then they get a drop in their blood sugar because their insulin's so high, and it's called reactive hypoglycemia. This happens in people too. And so you feel horrible, and you go, oh my God, I need to eat something. Even though you just had all this food and all these calories, they're locked away. You can't use them. And so your blood sugar drops down and you eat more. And so, what is grains and skim milk? It's breakfast cereal, right? So, we're feeding people by the billions in the same way that we have known for centuries is the best way to fatten up hogs for slaughter, right? So not a great idea. So the best thing you can do is eliminate out everything except fatty meat and water. Get rid of everything. Cut out dairy, cut out coffee, cut out all these things, and just eat fatty meat and water. Sometimes people undereat. It's very easy to undereat on a carnivore diet, and you can stall that way as well, because you're telling your body you're in a famine and you're not eating enough. So you eat fatty meat until it stops tasting good. And sometimes eating a little bit more actually raises your metabolism. So we tell people we don't want to slow your metabolism. We want to encourage your metabolism. So I tell my patients who are trying to lose weight to eat more, but eat the right things. And they lose weight, and they lose a lot of weight, and they get down to their optimal weight. And it's a little counterintuitive, but when you understand how the metabolism works, and that you have one, and it can slow down and speed up according to your inputs, it starts to make a lot more sense.
So eat high-fat meat, avoid the tea, coffee, and alcohol, because that was a question I got around, can I have tea, coffee, and alcohol? Obviously not. You have to try to avoid it. What do you think about iodine? Do you have to add that to a carnivore diet?
So in my patients, I quite often will test for iodine, and I've found that's about 50-50 for carnivores and non-carnivores. Just everybody, it's about 50-50 have enough iodine. That's going to have to do, that has to do with soil health for the plants that you're eating, the soil that's grown in, for the animals that you're eating that are on grass or feed, and what's in the soil of that plant that they eat. Seafood has a lot of iodine because the ocean is replete with iodine. And so if you're eating, fish and those sorts of things, farm fish you want to avoid, but wild caught fish is really good. I do know of some people that are starting to come out with some farm fish where they're actually, because the whole point is that they feed them a bunch of garbage that they're not designed to eat either. So they're not going to be as healthy because they're not eating the right food. And so they're not going to have the right nutrients. But there are some companies that are trying to look into that and see, okay, well, can we feed a fish more natural fish food and algae and things like that, so they actually get the proper nutrients, and so they're healthy, and so therefore we'd be healthy. But at the moment, it's pretty much want to just stick to wild caught. So if you're eating seafood, usually people are okay. If the soil health is good and has a lot of iodine and things like that, then you're probably fine. But I think it's worth testing. It's something that I think a lot of people will be surprised at. It is interesting that I've tested people and their thyroid is perfect, their health is perfect, all these things are perfect, and their iodine is like, oh, actually that's a bit lower than you want. And so, easy enough. You add in a bit more seafood, it comes right up. If they don't want to do that, you do some Lugol's drops, things like that. I don't think it's too horrible to add any of these things. I don't think you need to supplement unless you need to supplement, but it's easy enough to check. Just check, just get your blood tested. Usually with urine, you have to do a urine sample as well because they correct it against your creatinine as well and your kidney function. And so just check. And if you need iodine, then either add more seafood or supplement. But plenty don't. But it's about 50-50, I'd say, for everybody. It just comes down to soil health, really.
Okay. Do you think people would need electrolytes when you first start carnivore? That's a big question that people have.
Some do. So when your insulin is dropping, insulin pulls in more electrolytes out of your kidneys from eliminating that in your urine. And so your kidney has to overcompensate when your insulin starts going up, because it'll draw in too many electrolytes. You're not going to be able to sort of get rid of the surplus. And too many electrolytes in your blood will kill you just as fast as too little electrolytes. So you have to maintain a homeostasis. You have to maintain a perfect balance. And so if you're drawing in too many with your insulin, then your kidneys have to overcompensate to draw even more electrolytes. So what happens and that can take decades. It takes decades and decades and decades to sort of slowly creep up your insulin. And so your kidneys have time to adapt to that. So what happens when you all of a sudden go ketogenic carnivore and your insulin just drops down to normal in a couple of months? Well, okay, it doesn't have the years to compensate for that. And so you can get a bit of a drop off in your electrolytes, and you can also spill out more water. You can get low blood volume, and you can get hypovolemia. And so this generally manifests as dizziness, especially when getting out of a chair. It's called postural hypotension. So you stand up and you go, oh God, we've all sort of gotten a bit of a head rush sometimes when we stand up too quickly. But this would be happening like every time you do it, right? That, by the way, can happen too when you're on blood pressure medications and your blood pressure starts correcting because your insulin comes down, your homocysteine goes down, all these other sorts of things that can cause high blood pressure correct. Now all of a sudden you're on too much medication and you're just dizzy and wacko and out of it. So you need to be careful of that as well. But you can lose too many electrolytes early on as your insulin's adjusting. But just like your kidney is adjusted on the way up, it can adjust on the way down. It's just sometimes there's a bit of a lag and you can lose too many. So if you're finding that you're symptomatic like that, you're not feeling well and you don't feel good. And some people attribute that the keto flu to that. I think a lot of that keto flu is also going to be withdrawals and keto specifically. When you're going ketogenic, people start eating massive amounts of vegetables as well as have massive amounts of plant toxins, and you're just poisoning yourself and you're just like, oh God, I don't feel well. I'm like, well, I don't doubt it. You're withdrawing from a bunch of drugs like sugar, and you're adding in a whole bunch of toxins from plants. And like, yeah, I wouldn't feel good either. With carnivore, you can get that as well. Again, you're going to feel some withdrawals, but you can also feel a bit crummy because of the low electrolytes. If you are going to have electrolytes, you do feel that would benefit you and you try it and it helps you, great. But don't do the ones that with artificial sweeteners or artificial flavorings. Just do the plain old, electrolytes. But it should be temporary. You shouldn't really need to do this long term. I do know of one individual who really needs to salt a lot, his food, like a lot, get like 7 grams of salt a day. And that's Dave Feldman. And he's been doing keto for a long time. And he just feels, pretty awful if he doesn't salt the living hell out of his food. And he uses quite a bit of salt. It's actually a bit funny because, we'll be, when we're at different conferences and things like that, he'll be salting his food and we'll be halfway done with our meal and he's like still salting and things like that. So it's kind of funny, but that works for him and that's fine. There is work from Professor Steve Phinney that's actually shown that it's certainly in that adjustment period, you will often need to add 5 to 7 grams of salt to a ketogenic diet. or else you could feel a bit rotten. But in practice, I find that a lot of people are fine. It could be that, if you have that can help you through the early stages, and it might be something to do with your electrolytes. But I find that quite a lot of people just do fine. They weather the early stages, little teething periods, just fine. And they don't necessarily need that. I've certainly never tested anybody's blood tests and found that their electrolytes were low, as in their potassium went low or their sodium went low. You get very sick if that happens, and they go too low, and so you can die. Actually, I've never seen that. I haven't seen that in anybody's blood work. Did see one person I did a consultation with, and his potassium was a couple points below where you'd want it, and he said, "But I feel fine. I feel great." And I said, "Okay, well, why don't you just test it again? Because it could have just been a lab error." And he tested again, and it was completely normal. So, whatever it was, if it was just a weird day and it didn't really affect him and went back up, or it was just a lab error, it was fine. So, yeah, long story short, those are the symptoms to look for: lightheadedness, sort of fluishness, just feeling just unwell in general. If that's the case, you can add in more salt, you can add in more electrolytes. If that makes you feel better, wonderful. Drink more water too. That's helpful as well. There are some people that overdo it and they just take massive amounts of electrolytes and they're just dumping salt today. They're basically just drinking seawater or something like that. And, and then they're feeling awful. Like, I don't know what's going on. It's just like, well, that's going on. Don't do that. So be a bit circumspect with it. If you're having a problem and you think that might be it, you can add these things on, but do it judiciously. Don't add in just, mountains and mountains and mountains of salt. Just ease your way into it and get the right amount for you.
How often should people eat, and should they do an aggressive fasting schedule?
I don't particularly promote fasting outside of specific medical conditions such as cancer or epilepsy. If you need to do that in order to control your GKI or your seizures, but for just the normal person, you tend to fall into a bit of a fasting period, like an intermittent fasting period. Like I eat once a day. Why do I eat once a day? Because I'm only hungry once a day. Because when you're eating high density nutrition, you don't need to eat as much or as often. And so I find that if I'm getting enough fatty meat, I just need to eat once a day, unless I'm working out a lot, playing rugby, lifting weights, and then I need to eat twice a day. And that's if I eat once a day, I'll still feel good, I'll still have energy, and I'll get more toned and leaned and muscular, but I won't bulk up. When I'm eating enough, I'm eating twice a day, then I stack on muscle very, very easily when I'm working out. And so it just depends on your body's demands. But the vast majority of the benefits you get from fasting, I think, come from just not eating the wrong things. And we know this from studies in the literature where they talk about thousands of studies showing benefits of fasting. But then there's studies that say, well, it's difficult to fast. People don't like it. They can't do it all the time. So what about a diet that mimics fasting, that mimics the metabolic state that you get in when you're fasting, aka a ketogenic diet? But ketogenic diets are sort of a 4-letter word in a lot of academic circles. So they have to hide it by saying, well, it's a fasting mimicking diet or something like that. It's a ketogenic diet. And so, or therapeutic carbohydrate restriction. You have to make it sound fancier or it doesn't count in medicine. This is why we name everything in Latin and Greek, because it has to be something mysterious, or else it's like, why are you guys paying us? If we're just using normal words like normal people, then anybody could learn. We have to have something mysterious like this whole new language to make it more exclusive. It's a ketogenic diet. That's what it is. And they find that these ketogenic diets, these fasting mimicking diets, that they have exactly the same benefits as fasting in a number of different specific outcomes, like diabetes, for instance. And so, other things when people say, well, autophagy, you have to fast for a number of days before autophagy will kick in. Well, actually, that's actually one of the functions of insulin. One of the really important reasons to keep your carbohydrate intake low is because you don't want to spike your insulin, because insulin is the fat storage hormone, but it also is is very important for it. It affects over 100, really hundreds of different physiological mechanisms in your body. It's an extremely important hormone. It's very active. And one of the things it does is it blocks autophagy. So it's not that you have to starve yourself and your body's just looking around for food somewhere. You have fat. That's what your food is. That's where your energy is. It's in your fat. And so what it's doing is autophagy is normal. Autophagy is just normal housekeeping. You're turning over these old, dead, dying, damaged cells, precancerous cells, zombie cells, whatever you want to call them, and turning over and recycling and making more of these important organelles like mitochondria. And so that all comes from insulin. So that's going to happen normally on its own. But if you elevate your insulin, it stops, right? So fasting lowers your insulin. It's not that, we're looking around for material, because they'll break down these cells, but then they'll make more of them. They'll break down these old damaged mitochondria, but then they'll make more of them. So it's actually a resource dependent process, an energy dependent process. They're not doing this to say, oh my God, we have to survive, so we need to break these things down because we need energy or something like that. It's just part of your normal programming and your normal housekeeping. So I think that you just eat fatty meat until it stops tasting good. You eat as many times a day as that is appropriate for you. And you live your life. I mean, that applies to anything. If you're trying to lose weight, eat fatty meat until it stops tasting good. Eat as many times during the day as you can. Try to get 1 to 2 grams of fat per gram of protein. Okay. What if you're trying to put on weight and you're trying to muscle up? Okay. Eat fatty meat until it stops tasting good. Eat as many times a day as your body's asking you to. Get 1 to 2 grams of fat per gram of protein. Okay. What about autoimmunity? What about diabetes? What about eat fatty meat until it stops tasting good? Eat as many times during the day as your body's asking you to. Try to get between 1 to 2 grams of fat as protein. It's the same thing. I was going to say too, one of the ways of optimizing this experience is adding in exercise. I mean, it's extremely important. First thing you can do, try to get your steps up if you can. I mean, some people are in a state that they're actually bedridden and they can't get up. Okay, so you need to focus on the diet first and lose enough weight and gain enough health so that you can get out of bed and start walking. And then you start walking as much as you can and start doing what you can. Eventually, if people are in a position to lift weights, anaerobic exercise is extremely healthy, and is a lot more healthy than just long drawn out jogs and things like that, or marathons even. So lifting weights and sprinting, those are the 2 best exercises you can do. Sprinting is probably the best all around full body workout that anybody can do. And if you start now, when you're young, then you just, you do a sprint session 3 days a week, just 10 sprints for maximal, 10 100s. 3 days a week, you'll be able to keep doing sprints into your 80s and 90s and over 100, and you're more likely to live over 100 as well if you're exercising like that. But if you never stop with that level of exercise, you'll never have to. You'll never lose the ability to. A sort of very jarring statistic a while ago, which was only 1% of people over 40 will ever sprint again, which is wild. Now, most people over 40 should be able to sprint, but they just won't. And eventually they'll lose the ability to. And so that's not something you want to lose, because as you grow older, the less you do, the less you'll be able to do. But the converse is true too, that the more you do, the more you'll be able to do. So I've seen men and women in their 60s and 70s, and I've heard of others even later than that started trying to change their diet, fix their health, and started trying to sprint. So they started with walking, started going as fast as they could, and started built up. You can build up on the exercise bike, and you can try and go as hard as you can on a stationary bicycle. And they were able to build up and actually start sprinting again in their 70s, which is amazing. And they massively improved their health as a result of that, and put on muscle even in their 70s. So, that's something that is very beneficial to people's health. And it obviously helps with fat loss as well. But, you got to got to remember that you will be putting on, if you're working out and you're sprinting and you're lifting weights, you will be putting on muscle, especially on a carnivore diet. And you'll probably be losing fat as well. But it may look like a stall because, I'm not losing any fat, but your clothes are fitting better and you're feeling better. And so you're likely losing fat, but putting on muscle.
Last question for you. You have probably helped thousands of patients, millions of people on social media. What do you think people do wrong? The number one thing they do wrong on a carnivore diet when they first start?
I think it's usually they're not actually fully on a carnivore diet. That's the most common thing when I see people not having the results that they want. Maybe they're getting improvements, but they're like, yeah, I feel better, but I'm not really getting these dramatic improvements that everybody else is talking about. It's almost always that they're not pure meat and only water. That's a big one. And the other one is having those unrealistic expectations. We get so myopic with one thing, like they want fat loss, or they want their eczema to go away, or they want something. And so they're focused on that one thing. And so they lose sight of the forest for the trees. So all these things are getting better and improving, but this one thing isn't going as fast as they want. And they're just like, what the hell's happening? You get very anxious and you can get very discouraged. And you can end up dropping off of it because you're like, well, this isn't happening. It's not working for me. I've seen people. There's one lady in the comments. She was very nice. She said that she actually really, really liked the carnivore diet. She was really sad that it didn't work for her because it made her feel so much better. She was able to come off her medications for autoimmune diseases. Her diabetes went away. And she felt so much better, had tons of energy and mental clarity, and brain fog was gone. She was sleeping better. And so she was like, all these, feeling so much better, but, just wasn't really losing weight. So I guess it just didn't work for me. And I had to stop it. And it was just like, it sounds like it was working amazingly well for you. It's just, you have to look at the whole picture and not just at one endpoint. Because if that one endpoint isn't moving as fast as you want it to, you'll lose track of all these other things. So again, first and foremost, this is about your health. Your overall health, is that improving? And if the answer is yes, then you need to keep going. And eventually, as you get healthier, your weight and the eczema and all these other sorts of things will keep getting better. And when I asked that lady, I said, okay, what exactly are you eating? She said she was eating a lot of meat, but she was also having dairy and coffee and erythritol, monk fruit sugar, in her coffee, with cream. And that is a classic weight loss stall, is artificial sweeteners. And it's, no, the studies show what the authors want them to show. And when you have industry funded research, you're going to get industry supportive results, which are erythritol is great. That's what you're going to get. And all these benefits, blah, blah, blah. But when you get independent labs that are doing independent studies, then you generally find the opposite. And so there are no end of studies showing that erythritol, stevia, other artificial sweeteners can actually give an insulin spike, and you get reactive hypoglycemia as a result. Your insulin goes up, and you're again in this fat storage mode, and you lock down your fat stores. So you can't actually burn fat, those sorts of things. And then you're adding in dairy and all that sort of stuff. So, main thing is, not looking at the big picture and, being too focused on one endpoint and not seeing all the other benefits that you're getting. Count your blessings. I mean, it's a saying for a reason. Look at the things that are going better. Look at the things that are going well. And be thankful for that, and trust the process, and trust that this is, the rest of it's going to improve as well, because it's doing it for millions of other people. Why is it not going to do it for you of all people? And then be really actually full carnivore. Just eat fatty meat, only drink water, cut out the rest. Down the line, when you've reached your health goals and you want to add back in poison, go for it. See how it goes. And you add one thing back in at a time. You say, okay, well, I don't have a problem with that. Fine. I mean, I don't care. I'm not here to be like, oh, you can only ever eat meat. I just want people to understand that meat's not bad for you. It's not going to cause disease. And we've been lied to about this. That's important for people to know. And that plants do have toxins and they can cause disease. And we're seeing this in everyday life. And it really shouldn't be a fight. I mean, it's staring us in the face. But if you get your health improvements and you want to start adding things back in, and you feel that they're not drawing you back and making you go back, sucking you back into your old life and your old ways, fine, that's up to you. If you can achieve these goals and not be strict just meat and water, fine, that's fine too. A lot of people need to be, though. And so if you're not finding that you're getting the results that you want, look at what you're eating. It's not enough to just eat meat, because meat's not this magic elixir that will just heal you. It's the nutrients that you need to allow your body to heal itself. But these other things cause harm and prevent your body from healing itself. And that's really important to remember. So if you're not getting the results that you want, if it's not going exactly how you want, get rid of absolutely everything besides fatty meat and water and see how you go. Quite often, things will get better.
How would you make America healthy again if you were to be nominated as JFK Jr.'s team?
Yeah, wow, that would be amazing. Just to try to get these same principles out to people, that there are things in this world that cause harm. They're starting to figure that out, and they're looking at processed food, but it's not just processed food. There are other things that cause harm. I mean, I love that people are drawing attention to the fact that we have, we're using artificial ingredients and really garbage chemicals and putting this in food, and other countries that just have that as illegal. You can't do that. We know that these things cause harm, or at least we strongly suspect they do. And yet, so they're illegal in other countries, but they're legal in America, and we're putting this crap in the food, and and that can cause harm. But talking about like the different dyes and things like that are in Fruit Loops and other ingredients and all that sort of stuff. And I think that that's important to point out. But at the same time, the problem isn't that there's red dye 40 in Fruit Loops. The problem is you're eating Fruit Loops, right? Fruit Loops are just god awful trash. And yes, there should be a standard, by which we treat the food industry, that you don't get to put these deleterious chemicals in the food. But the food is not food; it's garbage, And so that is really important to get rid of that crap, get rid of this processed food, and educate people. I think it's really important. I think it's really important also to hold people accountable. I mean, we have seen examples of, we know the sugar company lied and put out, fake research to say that cholesterol caused heart disease. People should be held culpable for that. And maybe those people that originally made that decision are dead now or have moved on. But what about the people that have perpetuated that and continued to push the funding of fraudulent studies to keep perpetuating that lie? We had the tobacco companies did this for 30 years, putting out research saying that, fake research that said that tobacco wasn't addictive, that it didn't cause emphysema, it didn't cause cancer, it was super good for you, it made you a man's man, and all that sort of bullshit. And then they got caught out. They found their memos that said that they knew full well this stuff was horrible for you and totally addictive. And what happened? They got fined $400 billion in the 80s. Oh my goodness, it's a big fine. Who cares? They knowingly put out a product that was killing people by the millions, right? Where the hell is the criminal suit against them? Those bastards should have been in jail or in front of a firing squad. That's mass murder. They intentionally put out a product that they knew would kill people so that they could profit off of it. You have to die if that happens. I'm not telling anybody to go hurt anybody. I'm talking about actual in the judicial system. Those sorts of people should be criminally prosecuted. And so I think it's the same thing for the sugar companies that are putting out this horrible product and lying about it, and they're paying people to lie. I think that should be met with criminal action, not just civil action. There's a lot of things. I mean, one of the things is in industry, it's the the food and drug companies and things like that. They get to decide what the FDA classifies as GRAS, generally recognized as safe, and that's putting the fox in charge of the hen house, right? So it's like they'll say like, hey, is this generally recognized as safe? Like, or do we need to regulate you and do studies and see if it's okay? No, it's safe. It's fine. Okay, we trust you. Like, why would you do that? The job of the FDA is to actually check that stuff. And a lot of times we put things in the food system, in the food supply, or in makeup and beauty and cleaning agents and these sorts of things without ever testing if they're healthy for humans. And we have to wait until they get irrefutably proven to be toxic, like tobacco, before anything's ever done about it. It's not even like those were banned. It was just they just knew about it now, and people just said, hey, this causes emphysema, right? And that was it. But like things like trans fats, we had trans fats for 100 years, and back in the 90s we knew that this was causing heart disease and heart attacks. It only got banned to an appreciable level in 2020, right? So it's like, I mean, I learned about how it's atherogenic in organic chemistry, in 2000. So, why are we waiting so long? Why are we doing it the other way around? Why aren't we proving something safe first before we start giving it to people to eat? Right now, we're just shoveling it in people and saying, hey, you can eat this. And then you have to prove that it's toxic. And then you can ban it. But it takes decades and decades and decades to do it. So that's backwards. I think you need to prove something's safe first, and then do that, and also be reproducible, because you have the glyphosate studies that said, oh, look at these animal models, 3 months, totally fine, no problems. Okay, but when you reproduced it, you showed that no, actually these animals get very, very sick. You just have to do it for a decent amount of time. When I was learning the scientific method and how to conduct research and things like that, it was very clear. Like you didn't trust something. You looked at it with a grain of salt. If it was just someone's experiment that they did, it had to be reproducible. So if somebody hadn't reproduced or followed your same steps and gotten the same results in an independent setting, you don't really trust it yet. And if it's reproducible elsewhere, you're like, okay, great, that's fine. But we've gone away from that. We don't do that. We don't look at reproducible studies, and it costs people too, because David Sinclair from Harvard, he came up with resveratrol. It's like, oh, this anti-aging thing, and grape seeds and things like that. I don't know why I would, but okay, so great. We're saying that this is anti-aging and it helps people. Well, he sold the rights to resveratrol to some major company for like $700 million, right? And then they tried to reproduce his studies and couldn't. So now they're suing him, saying, hey, you sold us bullshit. But that's the whole point of reproducibility. Like, you need to show in an independent setting that this actually works the way you say it to, or you shouldn't spend $700 million on it. Those sorts of things. So criminalizing, these criminal business practices, I think is really important. Setting, making actual regulators say what's grass or not, proving that something's safe before you start feeding it to people, and having reproducible studies to show this. And just as a complete aside, I think probably one of the main things that would completely revolutionize healthcare as we know it is using reference ranges for lab tests that actually denote optimal levels as opposed to averages. And so people don't recognize this. Most doctors don't understand this, that the lab reference ranges are just averages. They're not optimal ranges. They're not saying, oh, this is what we want. We treat them as that. We say, oh yeah, you're in the reference range. That's our reference range. So that's fine. That's what we use. Okay, so if it's outside of that, ooh, that's bad. But in the range, oh, that's all fine. So that would assume and presume that those are optimal reference ranges, but they're not, and they're not even advertised as optimal reference ranges. They're advertised as average reference ranges. And the average person is sick, overweight, and malnourished. Why are we comparing ourselves to the average person? I don't want to compare myself to the average person. I want to compare myself to an optimal person. And so when you look at optimal reference ranges, it's very different. This is why every single lab in your same town will have different reference ranges. People say, well, if you're in a different location, in a different environment, that matters. It doesn't actually. That's a completely made up concept. But if you're in the snow, you need the same amount of B12 as you do in the desert. It's B12. You just need it, right? And so, but that also doesn't explain why 3 labs all next door to each other in the same town all have different reference ranges. You're in the same exact environment, so that's nothing new. So just changing reference ranges to actual agreed upon optimal reference ranges that have been found through maybe looking at averages for actual healthy people. And this has been done in Germany, where they looked at people in their 20s, average age 25, both men and women, that just had normal BMI and no diagnosed medical issues. That's it. Very low bar. And those reference ranges are wildly different. And then through research and people studying this and saying, okay, what's optimal? Where do we want to be? And saying, okay, this is what we think based on this research. Using those reference ranges, you would absolutely revolutionize medicine, because you would allow doctors to see problems instead of have it being hidden by the averages. Because if everybody, the average person in Western countries eats 80% of their calories are plant-based. It's just they're largely processed plants, junk food, right? Or pizza, bread, these sorts of things. So that's by calories. So people say, oh, we need to go plant-based. We're already plant-based. 80% plant-based, except me, except you too. So that's the average person is plant-based. And so the average person is not getting enough B12. That's all there is to it. And I check everybody's B12. There's no one whose B12 is in a good range unless they're carnivore or heavily supplementing. And most people don't supplement enough if they're not on a carnivore diet. And so, but that's hidden because everybody's B12 deficient. So because it's an average of that community, that malnourished community, then you're hiding that. So now, because everybody's B12 deficient and you're looking at that average, now no one's B12 deficient. So that reference range is slid down to the left. Same with testosterone. We know now that testosterone in men is the lowest it's ever been in recorded history. And yet most people are in that reference range. Okay. That's because the reference range goes too low, because it's an average for a sick population. And so when you go to the doctor and you feel unwell and you have all these problems, you go, look, I don't know what's going on, but something's wrong. And your doctor does a ton of blood tests and goes like, okay, well, what's going on? Well, B12's fine, testosterone's fine, this is fine, that's fine. They go like, okay, well, I don't feel fine. So obviously you're missing something. And then you look at optimal reference ranges and you actually see that there's about 15 things that are wrong. But if they're hidden in the average reference ranges, you can't see them. And so a doctor doesn't even know what there is to treat because he's not seeing anything, right? And so just using optimal reference ranges will allow you as a clinician to see what's wrong and to address it. And I think that would make a massive difference. I mean, that's one of the main things I do in my practice is just look at optimal reference ranges. And I can show people all these things that are wrong and say, look, you have to change your life in these ways. And you can use medications to help with that as well. But, if you are looking at the wrong reference ranges, if you're looking at the average reference ranges, you're not even going to see the problem in the first place, unless it's really bad, unless it's just floridly deficient or something else. But I think that would make a massive, massive difference in how we treat patients.
Very complete answer. Well, thank you so much for your time. If people want to find you more, apart from your fabulous YouTube channel, where can they find you?
Well, thank you for having me. It's always good to see you. I'm active on Instagram and Twitter-ish. And so Instagram is just my name, Anthony Chaffee, MD. My podcast is the Plant Free MD. YouTube is the same, Anthony Chaffee MD. Twitter is Anthony_Chaffee. Those sorts of things. And I have a website, which is thecarnivorelife.com, and that has all my links and socials and all that stuff on there as well as my new videos that are out, and actually quite a lot of resources and studies and papers and links to a lot of different things as well that people can look at there.
Thank you for joining me today on this episode with Dr. Anthony Chaffee. If you would like more information about anything that Dr. Chaffee discussed in this episode, all you have to do is go to the description of this video, click on how to get faster carnivore results, and that will open up to the Primal Labs. You'll see everything there about how to get faster carnivore results and what you need to eat on a carnivore diet. Now, if you're learning from and enjoying these free episodes, please hit the subscribe button. That is an excellent way to support this free health podcast. You can also find me on other social media accounts. I'm on Instagram and on X, formerly known as Twitter, under the name of the Primal Podcast. Now, if you love this episode, you'll also enjoy another episode I did with Sally Norton. We discussed oxalates and oxalate dumping. Now, especially if you're starting a carnivore diet, you might experience some oxalate dumping. So you need to know what oxalates are and how to get rid of oxalates. Sally will talk about the worst foods that are high in oxalates that you need to avoid and how to clear oxalates out of your system without the common side effects. Finally, thank you for your interest in root cause healing, and I'll see you next week.